Hello and a very warm welcome indeed to Quadriga, coming to you from the heart of Berlin. And the focus this week is on Turkey's financial crisis that many observers feel could spiral out of control. The Turkish lira has lost close to 40% of its value against the dollar since the start of the year. Contagion is now the watchword. The fear is that the turmoil in Turkey could impact other economies. But President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has in recent years put Turkey on the road to autocracy, and he's launched repeated vitriolic verbal attacks on the EU and on Germany. So our question this week here on Quadriga is crisis in Turkey. Should Europe prop up Erdogan? And to discuss that question, I'm joined here in the studio by three astute observers and analysts, beginning with Alan Posener, author and commentator for the Berlin newspaper Die Welt, who says Europe must help Turkey. The Erdogans come and go, but the Turkish people remain Europe's bridge to the Muslim world. Also with us is Christoph von Marschall, chief diplomatic correspondent for another Berlin daily, the Tagesspiegel. Christoph believes that Erdogan is a misguided autocrat. He'll only respond to pressure and not to support. And a warm welcome to Seda, Serdar, the head of foreign news at Deutsche Welle's politics department. Seda argues that Europe must strive for a stable Turkey, but not at any cost. And thank you all for being here. I'd like to begin with Seda, of course, and invite you to map out for us just how grave the current crisis in Turkey is.
Well, of course, the government is still trying to downplay it. It's trying to say, yes, we will survive this. Erdogan is keen on trying to convince the public this way. However, the citizens are already feeling the pain very, very intensely. Right now is the sacrifice days in Turkey. It's a very, very important religious event. And this year, it's to buy an animal, to sacrifice and to give to the poor, basically, is 10 times much more higher than it was a year ago. On a daily basis, when you go to the market, you no longer can afford the things that you were able to before. So people are really feeling this pain. Also, small businesses, they're buying goods in dollars and they're trying not to reflect this situation to the consumers. So they're also stuck in between. Either they're going to raise the prices and lose customers, or they're going to suffer, and they're trying to find a balance. So it's really, it's not good, actually, right now it's happening.
And are people being affected equally, or are there specific groups in Turkish society who are being harder hit than other groups?
Of course, the poorest of the society is being hit a lot, but of course the investors as well, because they have all these debts in US dollars and euros, so they're also being hit extremely in this crisis.
Christoph von Marschall, we've heard about how grave, how serious the crisis is. It appears that it's going to get worse before it gets better. To what extent can all this be laid at President Erdogan's door?
To a very high degree. The financial situation is caused by his wrong economic policies and policies when it comes to the rates for lending. And so I think this is a situation where Europe and the United States, but we are talking at the moment about Europe, can influence his course of action, offering support, but not at any cost, under very firm conditions. And that is, we need an economic aid program run by the International Monetary Fund. We need Erdogan to stop his blackmailing of partners, which he did over recent years, just putting German or American citizens into jail and only offering to release them under certain conditions, that is blackmailing a NATO partner. And he is also very unreliable as a NATO partner. He, for example, Germany had Bundeswehr troops in Turkey to help Turkey to be in a safe situation with the war next door in Syria. And Erdogan even didn't admit German parliamentarians to visit German soldiers. And so we had to change that and pull our troops out. So there's a lot of things where Erdogan is unreliable, and now he needs our help. And that is a moment where we should have very firm conditions under which we will give him financial aid.
Alan Posener, President Erdogan is to blame?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, he started out as an economic reformer.
Important point.
Yeah, and the West, especially Europe, welcomed that. And the idea was that Turkey, with a sort of mild brand of Islamism, could go beyond Kemalist nationalism, and Kurds and Turks and other minorities could find common ground in being Turkish and Islamic, and at the same time having this economic reform. But for whatever reason, he abandoned that cause. He has abandoned the cause of reconciliation with the Kurds. He's also abandoned economic reform in favour of easy money. Looks good, can build a huge presidential palace in Istanbul, can build a bridge across the Bosporus, all financed with easy money, most of it going to firms which are in his orbit or the orbit of his family. And that has ruined the economy. The problem is, do the Turks realise that it's his fault, or is he succeeding in peddling the notion that it's actually the fault of especially the Americans with their sanctions and the West and so on, who are anti-Turkish and so on. So that's something we need to counter.
Mm. Well, as Alan has just mentioned, President Erdogan has accused the United States of launching what he has called an attempted economic coup against Turkey. Let's get a feel for what the president himself and some of his Turkish compatriots have been saying.
There is no difference between the attacks on our economy and the attacks on our religion and our nation. The goal is the same, and that is to bring Turkey and its people to their knees and hold them hostage.
Let the Americans impose their sanctions. We have President Erdogan. We'll fight back. We're not finished yet. I had a few dollars and I went right out and exchanged them.
If we stick together, the U.S. sanctions won't have any effect on us. Maybe this will bring us closer together.
This affects all of us. Everything's more expensive. Prices have doubled. What will happen next? It's bad enough for us older folks. But what about the young people and their future?
Seda, Serdar, you were smiling as we listened to that report.
Yes, because you can see that the people on the street are also divided like the country. You can see certain people are convinced that, you know, as long as Erdogan is there, everything will be good. And that has a lot to do with his power on the media, allowing his word to be the only word out there. And the other people who have not voted for him basically know what's really happening. And so the society, the public is also very much divided. And unfortunately, there are still people who believe in these empty words. And it's also
empty words, you say, they're certainly drastic words. I actually wrote them down again, what he said at the beginning of that report. The goal is to bring Turkey and its people to their knees and to hold them hostage. Who's he addressing with that kind of seemingly paranoid language?
Well, he's always trying to demonize the West. He's always trying to find new enemies to make people believe that Turkey is on its own and it can only survive on its own. And everybody else out there is bad. We've experienced this with his language towards Germany. We've experienced this with his communication with the US and with other countries as well, in Holland. So this is his way of trying to show this like us versus them kind of language.
Alan, you were nodding.
Yeah, I agree. And this is the problem. It's obvious that the American sanctions don't help. It's given him a handle to shove the blame off to a United States president who is not respected anywhere in the world, and whereas in fact the U.S. sanctions have only very little bit to do with the whole question, which is homegrown, the present crisis, it's precisely because of this narrative we're on our own that Europe especially should sort of dangle presents in front of him and say, look, we're willing to help you out of this crisis if you do the economic right thing. Because another thing we ought to do, we're in Deutsche Welle. Deutsche Welle definitely needs to get its Turkish TV program up and running and to really create an alternative source of information in Turkey, the way Radio Free Europe and others did during the Cold War towards the East. This is so important that the Turks have an alternative narrative of what actually people in the West feel about Turkey, while we are offering this economic help, which we should, waiting for the government to do this, and we should also
it's not happening.
it's not happening, but I think it should happen.
Turkey's government violates human rights. Turkey has arrested German citizens. Turkey has got, as we heard, has prevented German parliamentarians from visiting troops in the field, serving for NATO in Turkey. And you're saying there should be a softly approach and not further sanctions on Turkey, as I understand it.
Yes. Firstly, the softly approach seems to have worked. For instance, with my colleague Denis Yücel, who was imprisoned on trumped-up charges, no pun intended, accused of spying simply for doing his job. And there are hundreds of others still in prison who don't have a German passport as Denis did. And you know, I mean, it's horrible. But I still think that we have to somehow, at the same time as helping Turkey economically, which is an important country, mustn't break down. There's another reason for this. When a country goes into an economic downturn spiral like in Venezuela, revolution doesn't happen. That's when people are so busy scrambling for bread, they don't have time to think about politics and changing regime. It's when people are more or less okay that they think about politics, and so, you know, we have no vested interest in seeing Turkey going down the sink.
Christoph von Marschall.
Yeah, but I would rather argue not soft. Now is the time for pressure and for our influence to achieve corrections in the course of President Erdogan. He is trying to blackmail us all the time. He just, when he needs our help, now he is offering, he released a German-Turkish journalist just a few days ago to make nice weather and nice feelings, but he didn't change course, and time is not on his side. So the first country which should be interested that Turkey doesn't go down the drain is Turkey. And the first leader who should be interested should be President Erdogan. Yes, we can help him, but under very firm conditions. And this is a moment where we can finally influence wrong Turkish behavior and try to get him to correct his course. And that is his financial course, his economic course, and how he deals with allies. He is an unreliable ally. And you can't be a free rider in NATO, just using NATO when you need it, and not paying attention to the interests of your closest allies like the United States and Germany when you think you have other interests. And Russia or China is not a serious alternative for the long-range Turkish policy where they want to find their place in the world.
Mm-hmm. The question is, before we talk about the conditionality and the terms that would have to be struck for Germany helping Turkey, let's just address the question of what would happen if if Germany and Europe do turn a blind eye to Turkey at this time of crisis. If they look the other way and say we can't support a country that's no longer committed to democracy, what would happen? Here's a take on that question.
The EU is Turkey's largest trading partner by far, and the biggest investor as well. So a recession in Turkey would be bad news for many European businesses. European banks, especially those in France, Italy and Spain, would be hit hard if Turkish businesses couldn't pay back loans denominated in euros or dollars. Further economic trouble in Turkey could also have serious political consequences. Some experts predict a new surge in refugees and warn that domestic extremist groups could try to take advantage of economic and political turmoil. But President Erdogan keeps blaming the West for his problems. He's threatened to turn toward authoritarian states like China and Russia. Turkey might even decide to leave NATO. What does economic and political instability in Turkey mean for the rest of the world?
How dangerous is an unstable Turkey, Seda?
I think it's very dangerous. I agree the first to lose would be Turkey. That's true. But maybe the second to lose would be Europe. It's very close. We have to think geographically. There are 3.5 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. Turkish government says it's more than that, around 4 million. There's a refugee deal that has been struck, and it seems to be functioning. What would happen if Turkey were really to go down? Where are all these people going to go? What about the Turkish citizens? Look at Venezuela. Of course, Turkey is not at that point, but just thinking of the worst case scenario, what is going to happen to all those people? Are they going to stay, or are they going to look for better options? So I feel it's very, very dangerous for Turkey and for the European Union, for Turkey to be left alone at a time like this.
The refugee issue is a very grave and serious issue here. What about the status of Turkey in NATO? Could Turkey eventually withdraw from NATO? How serious is that threat?
I don't think that the threat is really big. Of course, there's a certain risk, and we don't want to push them in that direction. But if Turkey has its senses together, they wouldn't leave NATO because of their own rational national interest. And so the question is now, how do we balance Turkish interests and our interests? And I'm not for soft conditions. I'm also not somebody saying just we don't have to, we can turn a blind eye on it. It doesn't matter for us. Oh, of course it matters. But we should be aware of our own influence and how important we are for them. And I have rather the feeling that we are much more important to Erdogan and the well-being of Turkey than Turkey is dependent, than we depend on Turkey's well-being. Of course we depend on it, but we have the better cards. And that should be the condition for a fair deal, that we are aware of our possibilities and our influence and how much Erdogan needs Europe and the West to modernize Turkey, to stabilize Turkey, and to get the economy going again. And then these are the conditions for a fair deal. And Turkey should be interested in it, we should be interested in it. But we shouldn't make a too cheap a deal from our side.
This is actually a good time to help Turkey to get back on the democracy track.
Yeah, and first on the economic stability track, and then, of course, democracy, how it works in Germany and France. I don't think it's realistic to expect that this is the way Turkish democracy will look like under Erdogan in the next years. I mean, he just did the contrary. He's a new sultan. He's almost an autocratic leader. There is no longer control to media and so on.
So he's not going to be listening to all this talk of pious conditionality. He's not going to be listening. He's going to be looking the other way.
No, he is listening. And you mentioned the deal about the refugees. This thing is working. So if we strike a deal under the right terms, he is willing to respect the deal. That is my lesson I draw from the migrant deal with Turkey.
Alan?
Yeah, this is I hate to say it, but it's a typically German way of looking at things, that somehow states and leaders of states are rational actors. They're not. Look at Putin, look at Trump, look at some of the things our own leadership has done, look at Greece. I mean, no. Look at Venezuela, look at Mr. Maduro. Rationality does not impinge on politics. Especially not on autocrats. Therefore, if Turkey goes down the drain, this will not mean the end of Mr. Erdogan. It'll just give him an opportunity to ramp up his autocratic way of dealing with society. Everyone, I mean, it's, you know, people in times of stress, people turn to dictators. When they feel a little better, they think about democracy. That's the way things go. And this idea that we're all rational actors, it's just not borne out by reality. So the point is now, we are interested that Turkey doesn't go down the drain economically. That's a prime interest, because if it does go down the drain economically, everything else goes down the drain. Now, if we help them, will that help democracy? We don't know. We don't know, but we shouldn't make that a conditionality, because they won't accept it.
There we agree.
Oh,
there
good.
we agree. I wouldn't make democracy part of the conditionality. But I think leaders are behaving rational. It's just a question what you call rational and irrational. Of course,
alternative facts.
No. Of course, the interest of Mr. Erdogan is to get a deal as cheap as possible. And our interest is to get a deal which is not cheap, but which meets most of our conditions. So there's and he
interesting, isn't it? How we're already talking like Mr. Trump. We're talking about deals and cheap.
Time is not on Mr. Erdogan's side, and that is our possibility, our option now to influence.
He's been in office since 2003. It doesn't look as though he's going to be walking away from the presidency anytime soon.
Yeah, but he has changed a lot. I mean, at the beginning, when Erdogan first came to power, we had still very much the thinking of a military regimes we had in Turkey before. And he used at that time the European Union, and that was our common interest, to liberalize the Turkish society, because it was his way to get also more religious freedom, which was a no-go under the military rulers before. At that time, we had a common interest, and now his interest has changed. Now he himself is the dominating factor. He himself is the autocratic factor in the political spectrum. And here we don't have the common interest. Here we try to correct his course, and now is the moment to do that.
But at that time, what did the European Union do? They said, OK, we don't want Turkish membership. We'll give them a privileged partnership. Yeah. So this, again, drew Turkey back. And now, at this point, I think it's really, really important that Turkey doesn't feel itself left alone again.
Yeah, there's so much mistrust between the two sides.
Exactly.
Angela Merkel always made it clear that she opposes Turkish entry to the EU, which was always viewed as an insult. And at the same time, President Erdogan's ranting and raving about German Nazi procedures and attitudes, which he has done on many occasions, has been perceived as insulting as well. How is it possible to see Angela Merkel and President Erdogan sitting down, Trump style, and striking a deal?
It's very difficult. But it is, I believe both leaders should really sit down and look for a reasonable solution. We would expect them to be reasonable. But it's not always the case, as we've seen it.
I'm very optimistic. That's exactly what they will do. It's not going to happen over the next days, but I expect to see this rational deal and compromise over the next weeks and maybe 2-3 months, because the house is on fire. And when the house is on fire, you don't have the luxury to discuss things, just call the firefighters. In this time, it's the financial firefighters. That is the International Monetary Fund. This is help from the European Union. And Erdogan has to meet certain conditions. That is all what I'm saying, and I'm expecting that is going to happen. I still believe in this kind of rationality. Of course, he has to sell it domestically, and he will sell it, the rhetorics, how he sell it, will sound very different than how we will sell it to our audience. But that's normal in international politics, isn't it?
Alan?
Well, yeah, I mean, I hope you're right, OK? I hope you're right. But look, Argentina was in a similar situation a couple of months back. And they called in the IMF, the firefighters, as you say, and they're back on course with IMF directives. But who's being called by Mr. Erdogan? He's calling Qatar. Qatar, which is basically the Arab agent of Iran. And they're going to lend him billions of dollars. And I fear, you know, if we don't make an alternative offer and say, look, don't take the money from Qatar, the conditions are going to be awful, you're going to everything you say, take our money. We also impose conditions, you know, which aren't nice to you, but at least you'll be back on the right side of history. That's what we should be doing, that's all I'm saying, instead of sort of keeping off as if it was nothing to do with us.
Yeah, okay. There we are on the same side. I'm exactly for the alternative offer, but not too cheap, rather a little bit more conditioned.
Seda, I think a lot of our viewers will be listening and thinking, asking themselves the question whether there is a sense that Germany has a special responsibility for Turkey and its population of 80 million people, given that there is such a large Turkish community in Germany, which very many people are aware of. What would your take be on that question?
Of course, there's this extreme historic tie. There are all these people with Turkish origin living here, about 3 million people. So, of course, it's a very, very important partner, Turkey, and they're very important partners.
So this is a window of opportunity where there could be a reset on Turkish-German relations.
Hopefully, that's what I'm hoping for. If President Erdogan doesn't make interesting statements as he did in the previous years, it would be an opening for Turkey and Germany to get closer again.
Angela Merkel has let it be known. She hasn't actually come out and spoken explicitly on all that we've been talking about, but she has let it be known that she herself does not favour financial aid from Germany to Turkey at this point in time. Is she getting it right or is she getting it wrong?
Well, first, there's this upcoming summit in Turkey on Syria. They're going to be meeting there. And then President Erdogan is going to be coming here. Before that, the finance ministers are going to be, again, meeting in Berlin. So I think this is a process that's going to kind of allow the leaders to see and talk behind closed doors and a little bit look at how they can manage a deal, probably. So, of course, Merkel doesn't want to give an open check to Erdogan. That would be the wrong thing to do, definitely.
Is Angela Merkel getting it right or getting it wrong, Alan?
She normally gets it half right.
Christoph, a final word?
She's getting it right, because this is not about a bilateral agreement. It's a deal with the United States, with the IMF, with Europe.
OK, thank you all for that. Thanks very much indeed for joining me today. Crisis in Turkey. Should Europe prop up Erdogan? That's been our debate. I hope we've given you plenty of food for thought. Come back next week. Tschüss. Bye-bye.